The sirens cut through the night, their shrill cries rising and falling like a warning that came too late. Beyond the gated walls of Dubai's most exclusive neighborhood, a convoy of emergency vehicles screeches to a halt. Paramedics move quickly, their footsteps echoing through the marble-floored entrance of a villa bathed in artificial light. Inside, the air is thick, too still, too heavy. A man lies sprawled across the polished floor, his white dress shirt soaked in deep red. The room is untouched except for the growing pool beneath him. No shattered glass, no signs of forced entry. Only the eerie contrast of wealth and violence, of silence and sirens. The name James Mitchell means nothing to most. A British expat, a successful banker, another foreigner drawn to the promise of prosperity in a city built on ambition. To those who knew him, he was careful, calculated, a man who worked hard to create a life free from chaos. Yet here he is, lifeless in his own home, with no struggle, no warning. Just hours ago, he was seen leaving a high-end restaurant, his arm around the woman who had been by his side for years. Sarah. She was always there at charity galas, at rooftop dinners, in the quiet moments behind the villa's towering gates. The perfect couple in a world where appearances mattered. But tonight, she is the only one left standing. The only one who knows what happened. Her voice shakes as she tells the officers her version of events. She describes an argument, a moment of anger that turned into something no one saw coming. But the evidence tells a different story. The timeline doesn't fit. The details don't add up. James Mitchell was a man in control of everything: his career, his wealth, his image. Yet in his final moments, that control slipped away. What happened in the hours leading up to his death? What truths lay buried beneath the picture-perfect life he and Sarah built? And why, in a city where discretion is currency, does this story refuse to be buried? James Mitchell was the kind of man people respected before they even met him. At 45, he had carved out a reputation as one of the most successful banking executives in Dubai, a man whose name carried weight in financial circles. He wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful, the kind of powerful that turned handshakes into deals and casual conversations into business opportunities. His life reflected that power. A penthouse overlooking the city skyline, invitations to the most exclusive events, a network that stretched across continents. And at his side always was Sarah. Sarah Mitchell was more than just the wife of a successful banker. She had built her own empire in the world of finance. An investment banker, a London School of Economics graduate, a woman with ambition that matched James's. She wasn't in his shadow. She was right there with him, moving through the same circles, commanding the same respect. Together, they weren't just another wealthy couple in Dubai. They were the kind of people others wanted to be. Their life looked flawless. Photos from yacht parties in the Mediterranean, black tie galas at Dubai's most prestigious venues, intimate dinners with the city's elite. They traveled first class, vacationed in private villas, attended events that most could only dream of. Everything about them seemed curated, polished, effortless. But behind the luxury, behind the public image, there were cracks. For years, they had tried to have a child. IVF treatments, doctor consultations, silent hope followed by crushing disappointment. It was the one thing money and influence couldn't fix. Sarah had spoken about it quietly to close friends. The strain, the exhaustion, the sense that no matter how perfect their lives seemed from the outside, something was missing. At first, they handled it like they handled everything else. With determination, control, and a belief that persistence would pay off. But with every failed attempt, the weight of it grew heavier. Friends noticed the subtle changes. James, usually composed, seemed more distant. Sarah, always poised, started canceling social plans. The effortless perfection they once projected started to feel like a performance, a routine that was harder to maintain. Still, they kept up appearances. The glamorous dinners continued, the vacations didn't stop, and in public, they remained the perfect couple. But those who paid attention could see the shift. The little things, forced smiles, brief silences, moments where they looked at each other and something unspoken lingered between them. To the outside world, they were living a dream. Behind closed doors, the foundation was starting to crack. And no one, Not their friends, not their colleagues, not even James and Sarah themselves could have predicted how quickly everything would come crashing down. James had always been a man with a packed schedule. Meetings that stretched late into the night, unexpected business trips, phone calls that couldn't wait. At first, Sarah thought nothing of it. His work required long hours, and high-level banking meant last-minute flights to London, Hong Kong, and New York. It was part of their lifestyle, the price of success. But then, the changes became harder to ignore. There were calls he took in another room, conversations that stopped the moment she walked in. Trips that were once planned weeks in advance now happened at a moment's notice, with barely an explanation. Sarah wasn't naive. She had spent enough time in their world to recognize when something wasn't right. And then there were the receipts. Designer jewelry from Cartier, luxury handbags from Paris. Purchases that never made their way home. Sarah hadn't received a new piece of jewelry in months. Yet James's bank statements told a different story. When she asked him about it, he brushed it off. Corporate gifts, he'd say, or a favor for a client's wife. But Sarah had a sinking feeling that the gifts weren't for a business associate. She tried to push the thoughts away. This was James, her husband, the man she had built a life with. But doubt had a way of creeping in, turning every late-night call, every unexplained absence into something more. And eventually, the suspicion became too much to ignore. She needed answers. Hassan al-Rashid was one of the most discreet private investigators in Dubai. His clients were the kind of people who couldn't afford public scandals, government officials, CEOs, high-profile families. When Sarah met with him, she didn't need to explain much. He had seen this before. He assured her that if there was something to find, he would find it. It didn't take long. The surveillance footage told her everything she needed to know. James wasn't in business meetings on those late nights. He wasn't traveling for urgent work matters. He was with her, a woman half his age with high cheekbones, long blonde hair, and the kind of beauty that turned heads in a city like Dubai. An aspiring model from Eastern Europe, someone who had caught James's attention and, from the looks of it, had kept it. There were romantic dinners at five-star restaurants, weekend stays at luxury hotels. He had rented an apartment for her, a modern, glass-walled home in one of the city's most exclusive buildings. The gifts weren't corporate favors. They were for her. Sarah had suspected betrayal. She wasn't prepared for how deep it went. The affair wasn't just a reckless fling. James had built an entire second life. He was spending obscene amounts of money, giving her everything she wanted. And now she was starting to want more. The messages between them, recovered by Hassan's team, painted a clear picture. She was growing restless. She had been the secret for too long. James had promised her things, promised her a future, and now she wanted him to deliver. At first, the demands were subtle. More money, a bigger apartment, a new car. Then the threats started. If James didn't give her what she wanted, she would go public. She knew how much he had to lose: his career, his reputation, his marriage. She had the photos, the messages, the proof. Sarah sat in silence as she scrolled through the evidence. The dinners, the weekends away, the gifts. The way he looked at this woman, the way he touched her. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a humiliation. The villa was silent, except for the ticking of the clock in the grand living room. Sarah sat in the dim light, waiting. James would be home soon. The evidence was laid out in front of her. Photos, messages, credit card statements. Every lie, every betrayal, documented in painful detail. She had played this moment over in her head for days, rehearsing what she would say, how she would say it. But when the door finally opened, all the preparation vanished. James walked in, loosened his tie, and barely looked in her direction. He was used to coming and going as he pleased. Sarah, however, wasn't going to let him walk past her this time. "We need to talk." Her voice was steady, but inside, her heart was pounding. She gestured toward the evidence spread across the coffee table. James glanced at it, then back at her. A flicker of something crossed his face. Surprise? Annoyance? Fear? "What is this?" His voice was calm, almost detached. "You tell me." James sighed, rubbing his temples. Sarah, if this is some kind of... Don't lie to me. Her tone cut through the air, sharper than she intended. James stared at her for a long moment before sinking into the chair across from her. He picked up one of the photos, an image of him and the woman at a hotel lounge, his hand resting on her knee. His expression didn't change. So, what do you want? The coldness of his response hit her like a slap. No denial, no remorse, just resignation. As if he had been expecting this moment. Sarah felt something inside her snap. You disgust me, she whispered. James leaned back, exhaling slowly. Look, Sarah, I never wanted to hurt you. But we both know this marriage hasn't been working for a long time. The words stung, but Sarah refused to let them break her. So, instead of talking to me, you chose this? You built a life with someone else. James ran a hand through his hair. I made a mistake. A mistake. She laughed bitterly. You bought her an apartment. You told her you loved her. James looked away. That was all the confirmation she needed. The argument escalated. The walls of the villa absorbed their voices, but the intensity filled every corner. Sarah's hands were shaking. I gave you everything. I stood by you through everything. And this is what I get? James stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. And what do you want me to say, Sarah? Do I regret it? That I'm sorry? Fine, I'm sorry. But it doesn't change anything. Silence hung between them, thick and suffocating. Then came the final blow. I love her. Sarah felt the room tilt. The world blurred around her. The anger, the heartbreak, the betrayal, they all crashed over her at once. The next moments were a blur. A drawer pulled open, the cold weight of metal in her hands. A gunshot, a scream, then silence. James lay on the floor, his body still, a crimson stain spreading across his crisp white shirt. The gun slipped from Sarah's fingers. The sound of her own breathing filled the room. The front door swung open moments later. A neighbor, drawn by the shouting and then the deafening silence, stood frozen in horror before pulling out their phone. The police were on their way. When they arrived, Sarah was seated on the sofa, her hands resting in her lap. She wasn't crying. She didn't panic. She was calm, eerily so. The officers moved cautiously, assessing the scene. James Mitchell, 45 years old, deceased from a single gunshot wound. No signs of forced entry. The wife, the only other person in the house, showed no visible distress. One officer knelt beside her. Mrs. Mitchell, can you tell us what happened? Sarah blinked, her voice quiet, measured. He betrayed me. The investigation had just begun. The courtroom was silent, the weight of anticipation pressing down on every person in attendance. Sarah sat motionless at the defense table, her face unreadable. Across from her, the prosecution was ready to dismantle her claims. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters, legal analysts, and high society spectators, all waiting to witness the final unraveling of a case that had already shocked the city. Then, the evidence that no one expected was presented. A previously overlooked security camera mounted on a neighboring villa revealed footage that shattered the prosecution's carefully constructed timeline. The original recordings had only shown James and Sarah inside their home, engaged in a heated confrontation. But this angle captured a critical detail. A third person. A figure, barely visible in the dimly lit alleyway, moving toward the back entrance of the Mitchell's villa. Moments later, a sharp flash of light, then the sound of a gunshot. Less than a minute after that, the same figure was seen leaving the property. Who was this person? And why had their presence never been mentioned? Whispers spread through the courtroom. Prosecutors hurriedly reviewed the footage, their confident expressions shifting into something less certain. If Sarah had been the only suspect, this changed everything. But the revelations didn't stop there. Phone records from the weeks leading up to the murder exposed a series of encrypted messages between James's mistress, Natalia Ivanova, and an unidentified number. The exchanges were short, vague, but unmistakably threatening. James had been making payments. To whom and for what, investigators were still piecing together. But the messages made one thing clear: He was desperate to keep something hidden. Then, another breakthrough. Surveillance footage from a luxury hotel in downtown Dubai showed Natalia meeting with a man just 2 nights before James's murder. He was older, Middle Eastern, well-dressed but unrecognizable. The conversation between them was brief, but tense. Natalia left the table looking shaken. The man remained, scrolling through his phone, appearing unbothered. Had James's affair been more than just a betrayal? Had Natalia been involved in something far beyond an illicit relationship? And then came the question no one had dared to ask until now. Was James's murder planned? The prosecution pushed forward, determined to keep the focus on Sarah. But her defense team seized the opportunity. Sarah had claimed self-defense from the beginning. Now, the evidence suggested that James wasn't just a cheating husband, he was a man under pressure. Someone had been after him. And now that someone was missing. Natalia Ivanova had vanished. No traces, no bank withdrawals, no phone activity, just gone. The courtroom buzzed with speculation. Was she running because she was guilty, or because she was in danger? And more importantly, was Sarah truly the killer? Or had she just been caught in something far more dangerous than anyone had realized? The courtroom was a pressure cooker, tension mounting with every passing second. Sarah sat at the defense table, her expression unreadable. Behind her, rows of spectators, some sympathetic, others eager to see justice served, waited for the trial to reach its breaking point. The prosecution had painted her as a cold, calculating woman who had finally snapped. The defense insisted she was a victim, cornered into an impossible situation. Testimonies were relentless. James's colleagues described him as a man under immense pressure, hinting at financial troubles that had never been made public. Friends of Sarah recounted her growing paranoia, the unraveling of a woman who once thrived in Dubai's elite circles. Natalia's former acquaintances were called to the stand, but none could explain her sudden disappearance. The biggest question remained unanswered. If Sarah didn't kill James, then who did? The forensic evidence was conflicting. Gunshot residue was found on Sarah's hands, but no conclusive proof placed the weapon in her grip at the time of the shooting. The security footage showing the unidentified third figure created doubt but not certainty. The prosecution argued it was a diversion tactic, a desperate attempt to shift blame. The defense called it reasonable doubt. Then, the moment of reckoning. The judge's gavel struck. The verdict was read. A sharp inhale from the gallery. A murmur rippling through the press. Sarah Mitchell guilty of manslaughter. The charge fell short of premeditated murder, but it was enough. She was sentenced to 9 years in prison, a ruling that left neither side fully satisfied. Too lenient for some, devastating for others. As she was led from the courtroom, her face remained blank, betraying no emotion. But the story didn't end there. Dubai's social media erupted. Theories spread like wildfire. Was Sarah protecting someone? Had she taken the fall for a crime she didn't commit? And what about Natalia? Some claimed she had fled to Europe under a new identity. Others believed she had been silenced. Whispers of a deeper conspiracy refused to fade. The Mitchell case wasn't just a tragic crime. It had become an obsession. A cautionary tale of wealth, betrayal, and consequences. And still, the one person who might hold all the answers was nowhere to be found. The city of Dubai glows under the night sky, its towering skyscrapers standing as symbols of ambition, power, and prestige. Yet, beneath the luxury and excess, one truth remains. No amount of wealth can shield anyone from the consequences of deception. James Mitchell had everything: status, influence, a life most could only dream of. But behind closed doors, his world was crumbling. His secret affair, the lies, the mounting pressure. It all led to an irreversible moment of destruction. Was it greed? Was it arrogance? Or simply a man who believed he could outrun the truth? Sarah Mitchell was once admired, respected, a woman who had built her success alongside her husband. But in the end, she became the center of a tragedy she never saw coming. Whether she was a victim or the mastermind remains a question many still debate. Did she act in self-defense? Or was she driven by years of betrayal and resentment? And then, there's Natalia, the woman at the heart of it all. The one who vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and speculation. Was she just an opportunist who played her role too well? Or was she the missing piece of a puzzle that still doesn't fit? This case wasn't just about one crime, it was a reflection of human nature. Lies, secrets, and ambition can create an illusion of control, but the truth has a way of breaking through. In the end, no one walked away unscathed. Now, the question remains, what do you think really happened? Was Sarah guilty? Did Natalia have a larger role than we know? Or was there someone else in the shadows, pulling the strings? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy real-life crime stories that make you question everything, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes the truth is far more complicated than the crime itself.